ခဲ့တဲ့ရက်ပိုင်းကကုလသမဂ္ဂဟာမြန်မာနိုင်ငံကလူ့အခွင့်အရေးချိုးဖောက်မှုတွေမြန်မာနိုင်ငံကစစ်ကောင်စီတပ်တွေရဲဆက်ဆက်ချေမှုန်းနေတဲ့သူဖန်စီကြံဖက်နေတဲ့အပေါ်မှာကုလသမဂ္ဂဖွဲ့စည်းမျိုးစုံဟာအရေးကြီးတဲ့အလုပ်တွေမလုပ်နိုင်ဘဲနဲ့ထိုင်ကြည့်နေတဲ့ကုလသမဂ္ဂတက်ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ဝေဖန်ထောက်ပြထားတဲ့အစီရင်ခံစာတစ်ခုထွက်ခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီအစီရင်ခံစာရေးသားသူကတော့Damion Lily ဖြစ်ပါတယ်အခုသူနဲ့ဆွေးနွေးပြီးတော့ဒီအစီရင်ခံစာအကြောင်းဒီအစီရင်ခံစာညွှန်လိုက်တဲ့အကြောင်းတင်ပြအောင်ဖြစ်ပါတယ် Hello Damion.
Hi there.
Hi, thank you for joining us. First of all, would you explain us about the reason, the motivation you are writing this report?
So yeah, first of all, thanks very much for having me. So yeah, maybe to explain the background of why I felt compelled to write the report. I've worked for the United Nations for a number of years. I don't currently work with the organization. I'm a consultant. I'm also a member of the Myanmar Accountability Project. And I arrived in Yangon in January, shortly before the coup. My wife works for an organization in the country, and therefore I came to the country. I didn't know much about its history, its people. I was very keen to meet everyone, and a few days later the coup happened, and I was shocked by the response of the UN, and having seen this in many other countries, what the UN does in situations, it's not wholly unusual that the UN is present in a country where there are political coups, where there is conflict, where there is development, human rights, many of the same problems that we're seeing unfortunately today in Myanmar. And I was shocked that the UN didn't respond in the same way as it has in many other contexts. And so I felt quite compelled to write this report and to research and speak to people to understand why that was the case. And also looking back at the past failures of the UN in terms of the Rakhine crisis a few years ago, to try and put this in perspective, but not to take a wholly doom and gloom perspective on it, but also to try and make some proposals about what else the UN could be doing to address the situation.
Yeah, you have some recommendation for the better leadership and structural strategy and political wills, also collaboration with the other partners as well, etc., to tackle the Burmese crisis. What could be the most practical, feasible recommendation from your report actually UN reform?
So I think the important thing for people to understand about the United Nations is there's two parts of it. One is the member states, the governments, and the intergovernment bodies like the Security Council, the General Assembly, which Myanmar is a member of. And then there's the United Nations, its agencies, funds and programs, and the work that it does on the ground. So when I talk about the UN, it's both of these things, but it's about what they can do collectively. And as the report found, it's woefully inadequate, the response that's been so far. If you look at the scale of the problem, as I was just saying, I think people in Myanmar should expect a lot more from the organization. So first and foremost, there has to be political will and support. The failure starts in the Security Council, and as people well know, it has failed to take even any action whatsoever to address the problem. An arms embargo, as setting up a sanctions regime, referring the situation to the International Criminal Court. All these actions are fully within the capability of the Security Council. It's done it in many other situations. There should similarly be action like this with respect to Myanmar. Now, failing that, and people know that there's political reasons and a deadlock in the Security Council, what's really required is leadership from the highest levels within the UN, the Secretary General, that really for him to take a lead, for him to visit the region, to meet with, ideally to come to the country and meet with those parties that need to strike some sort of political process, but if not, to meet ASEAN and other members in the region and to try and forge a role for the United Nations in some kind of political solution to the problem. At the moment, there really is very little political strategy from the UN, in my view.
Yeah, you also mentioned that UN, many UN agencies inside Myanmar right now, since after the February coup, they are not willing or they are not able to find a solutions or take actions to respond to these human rights violations in the street happening every day. How come you mentioned they are not willing or unable?
That is the other side of the UN. It's the agencies, funds and programs that everyone's familiar with. And obviously I cannot speak for them, but I've seen the kinds of actions that they're involved in, the programs that they run, and many of them have obviously worked in the country for many, many years. And they're delivering urgently needed assistance for people in Myanmar. But in terms of the human rights situation and in terms of what more they could be doing, I mean, first and foremost is about scaling up the humanitarian assistance that is being provided. The latest reports, I think 230,000 people have now been displaced in areas where conflict has been intensified. There's still obviously the protest movement and all the impact of that, and really scaling up activities in terms of psychosocial support, legal aid, dealing with individual cases. Many of these issues that really has seen as too difficult and too challenging to provide. And so, it is one of the most difficult environments for the UN to work. The UN works with the consent and hosting of the authorities in a country. And so when those authorities are not willing to provide the environment in which to work, that makes it challenging. But that needs to show that there needs to be a redoubling of effort, and I think much more could be done by the UN in all these. And it also requires the donors placing the funds available. The appeal that the UN has launched for its funding is woefully underfunded. And if you look at many other crises around the world, and many are gaining the attention, unfortunately Myanmar the attention in it is fading away as it doesn't grab the headlines, and that will mean less funding is provided and less activities can be prevented. So I think it's really important that UN really tries to raise the profile and a lot of what it can do, because it can have a positive impact.
Yeah, at some point, in your report, you mentioned that the price of the UN failures to take action now is incalculable. Let's say in the very, very worst case scenario, if a UN is not in for the sake of the damage chain, the country is going to be a failed state, or many suggest that. So how would you mention in the very, very worst case scenario, if UN states remain the same?
Situation, the UN has been in many situations like this around the world, where it, one of the key priorities of the Secretary General is about prevention. He came into office and promoted the idea that we don't want to wait till crisis happens and respond. He urged the world to focus on preventing them. And if you look at the situations, I understand it, and people know the situation much better than I, but the lessons were borne out before the coup. It was the failure to respond in terms of the crisis in the Rakhine a few years ago. The lessons from that were not heeded. The situation was not addressed at that point. And it's specifically the impunity with which the military junta was able to continue its action that has now led to the situation today. So I think there's many lessons about preventing the situation, and where we find ourselves now, the country finds itself now, and I've seen that in many other places, where there is unfortunately a slide towards more full-scale conflict, and even people have talked about state collapse, and the rising number of people displaced, the rising levels of violence are now reaching towns. We've seen clashes within actual towns, not just in rural areas now. I think this is very serious. And so the message to the UN, again, it has to start with the Security Council, and then it has to be action from there. If you don't take action now, we've seen in many other crises, you're going to be dealing with a situation far worse in a few months' time. So it's the responsibility of everyone to avert arriving at a situation like that.
Well, for the majority of Burmese people, for the majority of the Generation Z, particularly protesting, getting involved in the protestings and the civil disobedience movements that now and struggles, most of them, some of them even ask the UN with the poster, how many dead bodies you want for R2P? Now they don't want to ask anymore for those. Now, for those people still fighting, they don't think the UN is just say exist. Would you have any message to those Burmese people feeling very bad about UN?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I share those concerns, and I think they are all extremely well founded. And I think it's a failure on the UN to let down these people who are demanding action. Unfortunately, not just in Myanmar, in many countries, we're seeing the whole human rights agenda under the threat that many countries are not supporting this in the same way that they used to. They're much more unwilling. But what really resonates, and I've worked in New York around the Security Council, when many states who don't believe in responsibility to protect say it's politicized, they say the concept is dead. And when people are holding this up on their placards and their T-shirts, it really shows that the situation, the concept is very alive in what they've experienced, and they're making a demand. They're making a demand from the international community to act. Unfortunately, there are very fine words. There's been many statements made by political leaders in the UN and others, but it hasn't led to action. But it's all born from the rights that people hold, the international laws that states have signed up to, and these processes are long, and it's a long struggle. Something that the Myanmar Accountability Project that I'm working with is trying to promote his legal accountability, and unfortunately it's a slow path to international justice, but it is an opportunity, and it has to be part of the solution, promoting accountability, and the change will come from within, and the international community needs to match that with its own action resources.